we know that they're going to learn so much, and we'd like to think that that's reciprocal. They will learn so much from the women leaders, but also we'll learn about the young women and what they're going through, young girls and what they're going through. So how the young girls are involved in the project is that they're going to be taught oral histories and feminist leadership, and combined that to do a social action project of a topic of their choice of things that affect them every day. Now, we don't know what that is because, as you know, we were interrupted by COVID, and so we'll kind of get back to it. I just want to take you, my colleague Laura is going to take you through some of the women that are involved, and 3 of those women join us today, but nonetheless, let's just have a look at the wonderful women and pioneers, in my opinion, who have been dogged in everything that they've done to get us to this point. So, Laura.
Hi. Hi, so yeah, thank you, Dionne. As Dionne said, for this project we interviewed 14 women leaders and photographed them. So just going to introduce you to them briefly and show their beautiful photographs, and including our speakers that you'll meet later on in this session. So our first speaker today is Sarbjit Ganger. Sarbjit is director of the Asian Women's Resource Centre, a specialist women's organisation in Brent. Sarbjit has over 20 years experience in the Borg sector. Our second speaker is Marai Larasi, Mbe. After 10 years in charge, Marai stepped down as executive director of Imkaan last year, the only UK second-tier women organisation addressing violence against Black and minoritized women and girls. She was previously co-chair of Violence Against Women Coalition. Our third speaker today is Dr. Marianne Stephenson. Marianne is director of Women's Budget Group, an organisation who aim to influence policymakers to create an economy that promotes gender equality. Marianne was previously director at Fawcett Society. Vivian Hayes. Vivian is chief executive of Women's Resource Centre, an organisation who aim to influence the leading national support organisation for the UK's women's sector. She has spent almost 30 years in the women's sector, both delivering and managing services. Rosalind Bragg. Rosalind is director of Maternity Action, the UK's leading charity committed to ending inequality and improving the health and well-being of pregnant women. Joyce Kallevik. Joyce is the national director of WISH, the only user-led women's mental health organisation working in prisons, hospitals and the community. Naana Otoo-Oyortey, MBE. Naana is executive director at Forward, the leading African women's rights organisation in the UK, focusing on FGM, child marriage and domestic and sexual violence. Pragna Patel. Pragna is a founding member of Southall Black Sisters and Women Against Fundamentalism. She is currently director of SBS, an organisation who aim to challenge all forms of gender-related violence against Black women. Lee Eggleston, OBE, and Sheila Coates, MBE. Sheila and Lee are founding members of South Essex Rape and Incest Crisis Centre, known as SERIC. Lee is currently chairwoman of Rape Crisis, and Sheila is director of SERIC. Dr. Akima Thomas, OBE. Akima is founder and clinical director of Women and Girls Network, a holistic therapeutic service for women and girls surviving violence. Akima has a background in nursing, social work, and psychotherapy. Ranjit Kaur. Ranjit was director of Rights of Women from 2000 to 2007, an organisation that aims to increase women's access to justice by providing legal advice to enable them to understand and use the law. She recently published her first book, The Dancing Maharani and Other Stories, which is a really brilliant book. So now that you've met some of the women, I'm going to hand back over to Dionne, who will introduce you to the speakers for today and begin the discussion.
Thank you, Laura. Wow, that's all I can say is wow. There are some part of the our associates who are also involved on the call today, so I will give some time to invite them to say something later on. But for now, I really think it's important that we get down to talking to our 3 guests. So I will say again, today I'm joined by 3 pioneers and defenders of women's rights who will share their journeys of activism, their motivations, their achievements, and the future of women's rights. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a good conversation, and it's going to be, as they say, real talk. So I know, and I am so grateful and appreciate you all being here with us today in this extremely busy and crucial time for women and girls. Many are locked at home with their abusers. Many are coping with reduced income. Some have limited food supplies, and many have no access to financial support. And many of us are at the cruel and calculated end, sharp end of racialized injustices. So my first question, but before I answer my first question, is there anything that, any questions that anybody has before we get started? Great. So Sarbjit, Marai and Marianne, if you unmute your mics, and then it's easier then for you to chat with us today. So what was your entry point into working with the women's sector, Marianne?
I mean, actually working in the women's sector was probably, paid work was when I started work at the Fawcett Society when I was in my mid-20s. But I mean, when I was about 4 years old, my mum put me in a t-shirt with a picture of Lucy from Peanuts on it, which said, "I am a new feminist." And I've still got the picture up on my wall. So I guess, you know, I was brought up by a feminist mother. I was born 50 years ago, so, you know, at the point of the Women's Liberation Conference. And I guess I'd always grown up with a commitment to feminism and to activism kind of within women's organisations, both, you know, not just in my paid work, but kind of as a volunteer, campaigning and kind of service providing organisations. So there's kind of no one entry point. Do you know what I mean? I feel it's kind of been there from the beginning, really.
Mm-hmm. And question to you, Marai.
So,
what was your entry point?
Ancestral greetings, everyone. Before I actually answer that, I want to say huge gratitude to Women's Resource Centre. I really want to big you up, Dionne, big up Viv, big up Laura for doing this labour, because actually it is really important that we have this living, breathing archive that if you like, helps to capture and make sure that that line in the sand is there in terms of women's voices and women's leadership in London. So much like Marianne, I think there is an entry point to the women's movement for me, and there's an entry point to the women's sector. And although they are connected, they're really not the same thing for me.
Tell us about them.
So my entry point to the women's movement really is connected to my mom, who sadly passed, 3 months ago, and her fierce, gentle, difficult Jamaican, kind of womanist, like no nonsense, independence, first woman in her family to wear trousers, that kind of thing. And the way that she raised us as her daughters to actually know that it was possible to have independence and bodily autonomy, and that those were things that were worth fighting for. And I was born in London, but raised in Jamaica and educated in a kind of, Cuban solidarity socialist politic that also gave me a certain way of thinking about the world. And then I read Angela Davis and it was done. It was just like I found myself. And then I'd been traveling. I'd been living in the US and in Jamaica, and came back to London and started volunteering in what was then Camden Women's Aid, that was much smaller and is now Solace, right? And I felt like I'd gone home. So I started doing refuge work, and it felt like I had this awesome gift, painful as well, to be able to work my politics. And so for me, there was something that was really deep and difficult, but also very necessary. And I knew that this is where I wanted to place my labor. So those are the two kind of connected entry points. If I hadn't had those teachings and those groundings, I wouldn't have followed that particular path in terms of going in and then, you know, kind of doing paid work.
Fantastic. Deep, difficult, like it. Sarbjit.
Okay, hello everybody. I'd also like to thank the Women's Resource Centre for this amazing event, really. And, you know, so many amazing women that were involved in the project, and I feel really privileged and honoured to be part of it as well. So just wanted to say thank you for everybody for organising this and doing all the hard work behind the scenes to make this event happen. I think my entry point again happened about 20 years ago. I mean, more than 20 years ago. And I think, Marai, you're absolutely right. You know, the entry point to the women's sector and then the entry point to the actual movement are two different things. So when I entered, it was actually, I went to this, I was working in Ealing Youth Services as a youth worker about 20 years ago, and there was this public meeting that came up about a woman that had been killed in Brent called Balwant Kaur. And I remember thinking, oh, I'd like to really go to this. And I went to this public meeting, and I can tell you, you know, the Balwant Kaur basically was a woman that experiencing abuse for many years. She was placed in a refuge, and actually she was killed by her partner. The partner tracked her down, he followed the children when Balwant was taking them to school. He followed her, and then somehow he got into the refuge, and he killed her in cold blood. And this meeting basically looked about what was going to happen to her children and safety issues. And it was the first time I'd actually heard of the word domestic abuse. I'd never come across it before. And I think it was from there when I saw the passion of the women, you know, the courage of the women to stand up and say, look, this is what's happening. We need answers. We need protection. We need safety. So I think that was quite vivid for me. And that really kind of made me want to get more involved. And a job came up at the Asian Women's Resource Centre, and I applied for it. Unfortunately, I got it. And that's when things started for me.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm just feeling so passionate about it all. And I hope others are feeling the same. You know, it's all resonating with everyone, how you got started, and that there was two different entry points. But nonetheless, it sounds to me that it was ingrained in everything of who you are and who you've become. So what would you say were the biggest achievements of the women's movement so far, Marai?
Wow. So yeah, that's complicated, isn't it? Because that we are here is an indication that we are the ones that survived. I think there are so many women out there who probably, for example, were able to access a refuge or able to go to a rape crisis services. Sheila, I see you there. I know that your video isn't on, but I see you there. I'm here for rape crisis always. So there's something for me around women being able to access Black-led services, women being able to have conversations about everything from FGM to forced marriage, women being able to imagine their safety. That for me, imagine or liberation, create or liberation. Those are the achievements. It's not like we've sorted it. We know how big this is. And we know that this is a process of, as we're doing this work and as we're struggling and fighting and creating change, that, you know, as Sarbrina from Million Women Rise says, you know, like alongside that, our enemies are also doing their work, right? And so for me, it's us being here, us, you know, holding the line all the time, pushing back against the state, trying to destroy us. For me, as a woman of African Caribbean ancestry, it's that we continue to assert our right to be on these islands, and there is a specific way that particular African heritage, Black feminist labor, does something in terms of making sure that we are alive, that we're safe, that we can dream a different way, that we can say, actually write us down in the history books now. It's those kind of things that for me might not seem on one level as big achievements, because we're used to thinking of achievement in capitalist terms. But actually, achievement is for me always like a space like this, that where we're going, you know, like, okay, COVID-19, you've come, you're taking out people that look like me. The police are taking out people that look like me. But you know what? We're still going to come on Zoom on a Thursday morning and talk about women's liberation, right? For me, that's part of how we think about achievement, you know?
Yes.
And that we continue to love each other, and we keep getting up. We get up every goddamn day to do this shit. Right, every day. And for me, that is an achievement, that we keep rising all the time. Oh, and that Million Women Rise happens every year. Or when people are trying to make us not be on the street, we're still out there. That's achievement for me.
Thank you.
Dionne, you asked.
I did, and I want it. Give it to me, all of it. Real talk. That's what I want. Sarbjit.
Achievements. I think that, you know, that there have been many achievements. I think the fact that, you know, women have died before us to get us to have the right to vote. I think, you know, that is, again, it's women that are creating that change and creating that change for women's equality. So having that vote, I think, was a huge kind of landmark that we're benefiting from as well. I think also just for us to kind of, I mean, very often women were seen as being at home, looking after children. Now some of us are actually going out to work and actually trying to, you know, become financially independent and economically independent. So I think there has been lots of changes and advances that we've made. But more so, I think there is so much more to do. I think the climate outside at the moment is very hostile. You know, the state is very hostile to us as Black women, as the women's sector. We're fighting for survival every single day. We're fighting for the crumbs of funding. We're fighting for our voices to be heard. We're fighting, and I feel sometimes, you know, that, you know, there are so many barriers for us to try and get our voices to be heard, and you know, and this is where we need that strength to pick us up, to keep us going. So I think there is still a lot of challenges for us. I'm so pleased that there is, you know, so many women's sector organizations out here on the Zoom call today. There are many that haven't made it, and I think that, you know, that we also need to recognize that, you know, the way that the state is kind of, you know, closing down our organizations, those organizations that actually say something that they don't like to hear, or say something that, you know, is going to be against the grain, you know, I think it's, you know, that makes us even, you know, affects us even more, and therefore we need to kind of step up. But I just want to make one other point. I think that also it's not just about having Black women as Black women. It's about having Black women that understands kind of structural inequalities, racism. We know that there are women out there sometimes that I feel, oh my goodness, you know, it feels that, you know, I'm just trying to think about, you know, the government and the way that, you know, our views are very different as well. So I think it, you know, we're coming from a starting point of our kind of experience of kind of racism and inequality. And sometimes I think we need to kind of talk about that a little bit more and understand how that impacts on us.
Yes. Marianne.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with so much of what's been said. I suppose for me, one of the greatest achievements is demonstrating the possibility of change. You know, sometimes you're in a situation where the way the world is seems inevitable, and you're constantly told that it's inevitable. That's the way the world is. That's the way things are. There isn't anything you can do about it. You know, people have tried, but, you know, hey. And actually, you know, what we've seen through the women's movement is that things can change. And it's not straightforward. It doesn't happen automatically, and it doesn't happen without a fight. It's not given to us if we behave ourselves. It's fought for and struggled for. But we can change things, and we can see things that at one point seemed absolutely inevitable and nothing could be done about it. And suddenly they're no longer inevitable. And I think that, you know, I mean, there's a whole list of individual things, you know, we could come up with from the right to vote, the Equal Pay Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, maternity rights, you know, criminalising rape within marriage, the women's refuge movement, all of those things. And they're all massively important, really, really are. But particularly when we're in the difficult times we're in now, you know, we've had 10 years of austerity that's just decimated the sector, that has hit women harder than men, and women of colour hardest of all, and disabled women. And we were just at the point where we thought we might be coming out of that, and COVID hit, and we're being pushed right back again. We're going to be seeing huge levels of unemployment going into the autumn as the furlough scheme ends. And it's going to be unemployment that particularly affects sectors that employ large numbers of women. And particularly poorer women. And so we're in a really, really difficult and challenging time. But actually, if you think, we have shown that you can change things. We have shown that this is not inevitable. We have shown that when women get together, they are incredibly powerful. And whether that is, you know, building a local service that is saving women's lives, or whether it's lobbying for a change in the law and getting that through, it's all part of a kind of web of activism. You know, we work in different places in different levels, and sometimes we're kind of encouraged to fight amongst ourselves about which point is the most important point for activism, or, you know, and actually it's all needed. And the thing that I really think is great to celebrate about this, I mean, when I was asked to do it, I felt a bit of a fraud, to be honest. I think, you know, we're all of us standing on the shoulders of the women who've come before us and the women who surround us. And, you know, nobody thinks, oh yeah, look at me, I'm a great leader, I'm fabulous. But the reason I wanted to be part of it was because I don't think we spend enough time celebrating the fact that we have made a difference.
Absolutely.
And I think that is the great achievement of the women's movement, showing that it's not inevitable and showing that change is possible.
Thank you. So we keep rising. We want our voices to be heard, and we strive for those achievements. And achievements, as you've all said, is not just couched in the capitalist vein. Achievements is they keep going, keep pushing through. And I love the idea of celebration, and I don't think we do that enough. But yeah, we can talk about that, hopefully from later on, and make it a point to actually come together more. I mean, you did all touch on the things that motivate you as leaders, and that I think you should also wear the badge of a leader, actually, because a lot of the times, you know, we kind of throw those things away, that it's not important, the thing what we've achieved. And we don't necessarily put a label on stuff, but actually I want you to own the fact that you're pioneers. I want you to own the fact that you are leaders in whatever that is, whether that be leaders in the community, in activism, in the household. We are all leaders of doing something and change. So my next question would be then, what motivates you as a leader? Sarbjit.
Okay. Again, I'll say, because of the privilege of working within the you know, specialist women's sector, BME sector, I would say one of the things that motivates me is when you know, really put it down to the ground when a woman says, you know, without you listening, without your support, I would have still been in the domestic violence situation that I was in. You know, just seeing women grow, you know, just giving women the space for them to find themselves, grow, and then, you know, kind of, you know, break away from a violent situation and independent. I think, you know, that is a real motivator. The little cards that we get in our office, I know my colleagues are on Zoom as well, you know, little cards, a thank you, and just generally, you know, the sincerity of the women that really value. Actually, you know, we don't do anything. We don't do anything. It's just giving the space to women and then saying thank you. And I think the other thing is just, again, the motivation is so many women, you know, Marianne, Marai, and all of the other women that have actually been part of this project. They're all motivators. They are all kind of encourage us to keep going.
Thank you. I think you do more. I think you, if I could say it about the specialist women's sector, is that actually we see women, we hear women. There's not many that can say that they really do that, and that's the difference for me. So you are doing so much because you're actually listening to what women want, and giving them hopefully everything that they need. Some of it funded, some of it not, but actually you're doing more than that. Marianne.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, there's two things that motivate me. And one is back to this thing about the possibility of change. If I didn't think things could get better, I'd give up and go home. You know, we'd all just stay in bed and eat chocolate and have a nice life. And sometimes it can feel really despairing, and you can feel really despondent, and you can feel that everything's set against you. But I continue to believe that change can happen, that this is not inevitable. And that we can do things differently, we can do things better. So that's one thing. The other thing that motivates me really is the incredible women in the women's movement. You know, the women that you get to meet and work with. I am constantly inspired by women in kind of sister organizations, that women that I meet. You know, I was really lucky when I was a young woman. I had a lot of support from older women in the sector who kind of mentored me and advised me and helped me. And one of the things that I try and do is to, you know, to support the next generation of women. And that's the other thing that I find inspiring, you know, meeting young women who've got, you know, energy and fight and passion and commitment, and really, you know, want to make a difference, and helping them kind of work out how they can do that best. And I think, you know, we don't talk enough actually about how intergenerational the women's movement is, and those opportunities for kind of learning across generations. I mean, sometimes we're all going to forget the lessons of our foremothers. That's kind of inevitable. I remember once meeting a woman called Kathleen Halpern, who'd been involved in the campaign in the 1920s to extend the vote beyond kind of married women and women over 35. And she was talking about how, she said, all these women who'd won us the vote looked at me, and I wore short skirts and cigarettes. This is the 20s. And they thought I was fast, and they didn't take me seriously. And they thought they could tell me what to do for the rest of my life because they'd won the vote. You know, there's always those generational battles. But actually, there's also incredible generational support and solidarity. We learn from each other. We share experiences. We benefit from the lessons of the women that have gone before, and from the kind of energy of the next generation of women who maybe haven't, you know, got so exhausted by life. And that I find that incredibly inspirational. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to hear about the intergenerational, and I think that's really important, because we have to pass the baton. Yeah. And whether we agree or not agree, the fact is that we're fighting for the rights of women and girls, however it's done. So I like the idea of that you've mentioned, you know, young women. Marai, question to you.
Okay, so holy things. I am motivated by our collective, the idea, the possibility of our collective liberation. I'm one of those women, and there'll be others on this Zoom call right now, who has risen from people that were trafficked and enslaved. I know, because I am the evidence of change is possible. So when my ancestors were trafficked and ended up in places like the Caribbean, I can imagine that they probably thought that this was the end. And it wasn't. It was awful, it was brutal, it was all of those things. And we are the ones that actually exist because of their survival. So for me, I am motivated by that, because I am only here because they survived. So 7 generations into the future, like, you know, women like me, children will only be here because we survived and because of the labor that we do now. I'm motivated by us taking care of this planet. I am motivated by us thinking about Mother Earth in the same way we think about actually what does it mean to protect and liberate our bodies, you know? I'm motivated by the fact that I've got a new granddaughter, and I'm like, what kind of world do I want her to be living in, you know? I'm motivated by us being able to sit with each other and deal with the messy truths of how we as women have harmed each other and how we continue to harm each other. I'm motivated by us being generous and caring with each other, but also rigorous with each other. I'm motivated by us excavating some of those truths. And I'm motivated by us getting over ourselves and stop allowing ourselves to actually not deal with the ruptures that exist between us. I'm motivated by not having to say Black Lives Matter, right? I'm motivated by recentering Black lives for me, you know? So for me, it's intersectional, inevitably. It's intersectional, it's layered, and in one moment, it's as simple as I'm motivated by us being able to get up, and my sisters being able, my communities being able to get up and eat tomorrow morning. That motivates me, like survival. Because sometimes, like there is, I don't want us to be just surviving. I want us to thrive. I want us to have magical lives, like where we're not having to think about this crap. I want to be, right now, I'd rather be sitting on a beach in Jamaica. I can tell you that for 100%, right? I would rather be doing that. But I am motivated by us making sure that we are able to at least survive. I don't want it to just be that, that's a basic. But I want us to be able to thrive. That motivates me. You know, I want something bigger, and I don't want us to have to keep doing this forever. I'm in this for the long game, but I'm motivated by us creating. It's the thing that Marianne said, the possibility of change, which links directly to the thing that Sarbjit said about when a woman experiences that individual change in her own life, but how that connects to something bigger. You know, and I'm motivated by the young ones and how badass some of the young women that I've met are, who are just like, I'm like, yes, preach, you know, I'm motivated by that.
Thank you so much. I just want to touch on a couple of things there. You talked about the messy truth. What is that messy truth, and what those conversations that we need to have, as in us as a movement?
We need to, well, you know, Dionne, here's the thing. Women like Sarbjit and I have been like carrying on about issues like race for time. We can, you know, I am grateful that we are in a conversation right now on these islands that looks like Black Lives Matter. But here's the thing. Why did it have to be 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a man's life in the US? Why did we not think about Sarah Reid, for example? And we should be carrying on because George Floyd got killed. Don't get me wrong, because it's important. But there is a way that the you know, issues such as race, like to, you know, when Black women, you know, have these conversations, it's like we're dividing the women's movement. I'm like, which movement are we talking about? Because if the women's movement centers white, middle class, heterosexual, non-disabled women, if the women's movement actually, for me, doesn't include, you know, my trans sisters that are getting killed, then it's like, for me, it's not a safe space for me. It isn't. If the women's movement means that if one of my sisters is wearing hijab, some white woman is going to tell her that she must take it off because she's oppressed, right, without interrogating why. So for me, those kind of conversations, why do we not have adequate provision in this country for African heritage women? It's not because we ain't been doing the work. Why do we have so few tiny, tiny services led by and for disabled women? It's not because disabled women ain't been doing the work. There is something about how we have not been able to sit and say, let us not build this thing around the easiest space for us to work. I know we're tired, but let us go to the places of the most acute harm and build from there and rebuild. And if actually by me, I don't want to call sisters out. I'm always going to be like, come, make we talk together. Let's sit, let's sit together. I ain't gonna get on Twitter and shame nobody. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Right? This is not the way that I work, but I also want us to be courageous enough to come together and speak about the harm that has been done and continues to be done. There is a reason that young women aren't thriving right now in parts of the women's sector, why they might be surviving and thriving in parts of our movement. You know, it's all of those things that we need to be thinking about. And so if we can do that, and if we can sit with the pain that dealing with the truth, you know, means, or if we can deal with the multiple truths, then actually we are really up in our game. And we are really thinking about, I don't want to tell anybody that Black Lives Matter. It's like me justifying my existence. I don't want to. Do you know what I mean? I want you to know that my life is valued. And I also want us to have conversations that look like, you know, when slavery happened and the Slavery Commission made its payment, between 25 and 45% of those claims were made by white women. White women have, in this country, have benefited, whether we like it or not, or whether you feel it or not, have benefited from the harm that was done to my ancestors. Can we have those kind of conversations so that we know that our lives are painfully intertwined and it's not always pretty and it's not always beautiful, but let's at least have the conversation. That's all. You know, it's not easy, it's just necessary.
Yes, it is necessary. And thank you for that. And I know I did add in the question there, but it's lovely. If you had to sum up the women's sector in 3 words, Marianne?
Oh, blimey. I'm just, you know, I've been really listening to what Marai was saying and thinking how right she is, and actually about complexity and difficulty. And I don't always think, you know, short, snappy responses are the way to deal with some of these things. I think you need something more. I would go back to something about change. But I don't think I can do 3 words. Sorry, I don't think it does justice to the complexity. Now everyone's going to do 3 words and they're going to be brilliant words, and I'm going to think, shit, I should have said that. But actually, I don't know. I mean, I think it would be useful to carry on the conversation that Marai brought up, rather than kind of jump to 3 words. I don't know what other people think, because I think
that conversation needs to be longer than 15.
Yeah, it needs to be longer than a Zoom call. Absolutely, it's an ongoing conversation.
I think it's something that
needs.
I think there needs to be a conference. There needs to be something. There needs to be a sit round a circle or whatever it might be. I think it needs to be, because it's deep, and it's not just one conversation. It has to be several conversations of unpacking all of it. From the, oh, you can't say this, to you need to say that, the language that we speak, that others might find difficult, and they want young women to have this particular language that is different from other people, things that alienate and they're barriers. There's so many things that we need to talk about, and I am so glad that Marai brought it up, but we do need to have the conversation. And hashtag Black Lives Matter is still not enough for me. But I think we need dedicated time. I don't think we can, and I'd like to park that, what Marai is saying, and actually go and create a conference or something that we have these discussions, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, I asked for the 3 things, if you had to sum up.
I'm sorry, Dionne.
It's fine. And that's what I'm here to do, is kind of just challenge your thinking on the spot. I know that you have always, the sector and the women in it have always come up with solutions. So I just threw that out there to get you ready for the next question, if you like. But if you're happy not to answer it, that's fine. Subject.
I've got 3 words.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, it is difficult to choose 3 words for the women's sector, but I'm also still very much with what Marai has just said, you know, and it's you know, about, you know, just women as Black women, we matter. I think, you know, that's really powerful, and sometimes I know that we have to say it, but we shouldn't have to say it. Do you know what I mean? I'm still there. Why we have to justify our existence and our and our worth? So I think that I value, Dionne, that having that conversation going forward, because I think it's really important that we continue that. But I mean, some of the things that come into my head when I think about the movement, I mean, I have to say strength. I have to say solidarity. I have to say passion. I mean, like I said, it's really difficult to pinpoint 3 words, but those are the ones that immediately came into my mind.
Those are brilliant words.
Yes, they
I
are.
have those words as well.
Marai?
You know, Dionne, you still don't say my name right. You know, it's Marai, and you, like, for years you've been calling me Marai. But as it's you, I forgive you.
Okay, Marai. Better? Better? Marai.
Better.
Okay.
3 words. Necessary, inspiring, and heartbreaking.
Also great words.
Yeah, great words.
Heartbreaking. Okay. So I think the last question from me, and then we'll, my colleagues will look at the chat, because I think there's some stuff coming through here on the chat. But my last question is, so what's the future? What are your thoughts on the future for women's rights? What do we still need to do? And again, another challenging question, but I place it there. Marai, better?
We need to show up. We need to show up, because if we're not there, then we are spoken about, and particularly for those of us who are subjected to intersectional oppression, for the global majority of women who are minoritized on these islands, it's important for us to show up. It's important for us to know that this is a long game, but it doesn't mean it's not urgent. You know, like, or lives is urgent. So we need to think about, what does solidarity look like in 2020? Because what it looked like 20 years ago might be very different. You know, what are the ways that as movements, you know, we have to become more considered. We have to know that some of us need to go and have a conversation with that fool in number 10. And some of us need to not be doing that. So we need to know that the work has got to be broad enough for all of us to be able to do the work that we're doing. We need to not be cussing women for having strategic advocacy conversations, and we need to be not cussing those women that take to the streets, because there's place for all of us. These are movements. This is a movement that requires that we are multi-pronged, that we are strategic, that we actually allow for each others to build in the ways that feel appropriate, but actually that we are wise enough, right, and savvy enough to connect the dots. We need to, I'm so glad Women's Budget Group exists, because we need to keep our eye on the money. Like, what is the government doing all the time with the money?
Mm-hmm.
But we need to actually attend to the bones. We need to deal with those ruptures between us. And we need to realize that we don't always have to agree on absolutely every detail, but we can form a powerful, respectful, collective consensus that involves us looking out for each other and actually making sure that we have each other's back, right? You know, like, I'm just going to say, because Sheila is on this call, when I was at Imkaan, there were times when we would go to meetings and I knew, Sheila's a white woman, and I knew that actually she would mention Imkaan, even she and Lee would mention Imkaan, even if we weren't able to be in the room. And we would always mention rape crisis, because we knew what was being done to the sexual violence sector, you know, was being mirrored in terms of what was happening in terms of BME provision. Right, and that for me was absolutely important. It was, and so we need to be working like that. Do you know what I mean? We need to actually have each other's back, and even if we disagree amongst ourselves in a little Zoom room and we're going to argue, let that be between us. But can we stop having fights on Twitter? Stop it. Just done it. Talk to one another in a Zoom room. Stop the fight on Twitter, man. It's mashing us up. And people are coming for us and taking us out because we're not talking to each other, but we're fighting on Twitter. That said, if what people want to call people out, you know, do your thing. But sorry. Yeah, I'm always gonna be like, I'm just getting more Jamaican with my old age. Do you know what I mean? My mum passed the other day, man. It's just like, you know, like, it's just coming through me. I'm not holding, like, I'm sorry. It's who I be. It's who I am. You know, like,
I'm really sorry to hear that. I didn't know, and I know it's not the night time, but I just want to, yeah, my condolences.
Thank you, sis. Thank you.
Sarbjit.
I think, well, what Marai's saying about Women's Budget Group and keeping an eye on the money is really important. We never, you know, we hear about announcements of 1.5 billion or whatever billion that we're getting, but the Black women's sector hardly see any of that money, and half of our work is trying to find out who we need to be writing to, who we need to be talking to try and get a slice of what our right is. Actually, we're always sometimes excluded from those processes. I want to say, I mean, I went on the Imkaan leadership course very, very recently, and that really made me look at things in a very, very different way. I mean, the trainers talked about the unspeakables, and the unspeakables was something that we hadn't talked about. You know, what do we think about, you know, what do we think about us? What do we think about sort of different, so what do we think about African women? What do Asian women think about African women? What do we think about women with disabilities? And it was really thinking and having those really comfortable, so first of all, having the space to do that. I've not had those spaces because we're so busy firefighting, trying to keep afloat with our organizations, but actually having that space to do that really made me think. And I think that is something that I would like to see going forward as a sector. We need to be doing a lot more of that. I think I need to be getting my own house in order before I start pointing the finger out at somebody else that saying that they're not doing things properly. So I think for that, I think we really need to create those safe spaces where we can really say what we feel and understand each other. I think that is a really important thing that we need to be doing as a sector. I think, but on the back of that, I think we need to be building solidarity. I think we need to be supporting one another. I think we need to know, you know, it's like when a women's centre is in threat of closure, you know, we shouldn't think that it doesn't affect us. We shouldn't sit there and think, oh no, it's their problem. But you know, if they're going for that organisation, they're going to be coming for you as well. So I think that we need to be building that solidarity. We need to build the sector. We've seen it, you know, diminish, especially the Black women's sector. We can count on our hand how many refuges and how many specialist organisations there are. And I think that that threat is going to continue. We are under threat, and we do need to think about how we're going to preserve, you know, the knowledge, the skills, the wealth of expertise that we've got. And I think it's our responsibility to do that.
Thank you. I think that's the name of a conference. What does solidarity look like in 2020? Oh, well, we have all of those conversations. I think that, Marianne, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think very much to have that space, to have those conversations in a face-to-face way where people can build trust and, as we said, you know, talk about the kind of messy and difficult truths and the painful truths and the way in which the women's movement has excluded the experience of women of colour and not stood in solidarity when it should have done. We need to have those conversations, but I also think Marai's right. We need to have those conversations in the real world, face to face, where we can kind of know and build relationships with each other. And I think Twitter is probably the worst place for dealing with difficult issues. I'm not saying people shouldn't speak about difficult issues on Twitter, but it isn't a space where you can actually build dialogue and understanding. It's a very good space for shouting across divides and getting those divides bigger and bigger. It's not a great space for bringing people together. And I think we need to do that work of working together and kind of not letting a call for solidarity be an excuse for silencing difficult issues, but equally not let the difficult issues be a reason why we don't try and build solidarity and work together. You know, that we have to be able to hold space for both. And that is difficult. It's not straightforward. It's hard work and it's painful work. But and it's particularly painful for those, you know, women on the sharp end of racism. I mean, it's just, you know, it's easy for me as a white woman to say this is painful work. Some of this is a different scale of pain, you know, and to recognise that I think is really important. And I think we need to do that because we need to be strong enough to deal with the issues in the outside world that we need to be able to address. And I really like Marai's point about working at different levels and in different sectors. We have different roles to play. You know, sometimes we're asked, what's the most important issue? What's the most important issue facing the women's movement? And I always say, well, the issue that the Women's Budget Group is prioritising is X, but so-and-so is prioritising that, which is also really important. And this organisation is working on, you know, there are multiple issues that we need to work on. Women's liberation is not a straightforward, you know, we've done this thing and then we've ticked that box and then we can all give up and go home or lie on a beach. It's happening in multiple places, in multiple sectors, and we need kind of complex responses. So, you know, the Women's Budget Group, we focus on the economy. That doesn't mean we don't recognise that male violence is a huge factor in economic inequality, and we try and work in partnership with organisations working on violence against women and girls, but that's not a sector we lead in. So, you know, we work on the economy, we try and do the numbers. Other people, you know, some people are brilliant at talking to ministers, other people are brilliant at setting up grassroots services. We need to have a movement that recognises that all of those things are important, and that wherever we feel our talents are best used, or wherever we feel called to work, we need the other people working in other places as well. And we need to recognise that what they're doing is important, rather than thinking, why are you doing this? You should be doing what I'm doing. We can't, you know, we all have to work where our strengths bring us. So I guess that's what I think in terms of going forward. It's to build a movement that is able to kind of reflect on itself and its history and move forward, but also one that can be strategic and make change. And that's a challenge. That's a huge job when a lot of us are, working in organisations that are managing on a shoestring and trying to pull things together with volunteer help. It's not straightforward. But back to this possibility of change thing, whenever I feel despondent or demoralised, I look and I see women just doing the most bloody amazing things, and you just think, okay, get up, give yourself a shake, go back out there and start again, because that's what women are doing every day. And so those of us in the sector kind of owe it to them to keep getting out there.
Thank you so much, all of you. There's so much to take in, so many takeaways. But as you summed up quite nicely, it's wherever point that we're at in working towards women and girls' rights, then we're all doing our work, and we should be recognised and valued for it at whatever point we're coming together. But together we all make up a movement. As I said, I think the conversation, not to disregard what Marai said or what anybody has said, that there's conversations that we need to have, and clearly they are difficult, they are messy, but we need to make the time to do that in the real space. But there is something about maybe setting the scene, so when we do get to the real space that we will do that. I like the idea of getting our houses in order, which is what Sarbjit said. If we can get our own, reflect on our own things with what's going on with ourselves and check our own biases, if you like, and really unpack what that looks like individually, not just as an organisation, but also for how are you going to do that going forward, work with other organisations. And I think Marai mentioned that a point of solidarity could be, and has been, is that other sisters have spoken up about her project or her organisation in her absence, understanding that work is important, it needed to be mentioned in a particular space, and stop the Twitter shaming. But yeah, if people want to do that, that's fine, but we have to stand together. We cannot be divided, because we will get picked off, and that's a fact. I just want to come back to something that before I go on to the questions. I think my colleagues have got some questions here. Maybe you can say what they are, Debbie, shortly. But to say, if somebody from Imkaan is on, can you post up the leadership training thing that Sarbjit mentioned, which is completely different to our leadership training. So I think we need to put it up there, and we can do that. So our task is quite big for the future, but nonetheless, we won't shirk away from it. We will embrace. So I don't mean to cut everything short, but I do want to take some questions from the feed.
So, sorry, somebody not muted. If somebody could mute themselves, I'm just going to do it. Right, I've done it. Okay, so basically, we've had loads of comments on the chat. So if people are okay with me saving the chat, I'm not going to put it anywhere public, but I might send it to Dionne, because I think she'll find it really, to the speakers, because I think they'll find it really affirmative to kind of read through and get some of the comments that people have been making. So just to go through that, there are some, so I've just pulled out some questions. So the first one is from PJ Samuel's Poet. So if you want to unmute yourself, it was to do with balancing life-work balance, mental health. It was quite a long question. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the speakers directly, please do so. If you're there, hello. Otherwise, I can ask it for you. Let me just find it, because it's quite way back. We've had
please do ask for me. I sort of type as I was going where depending on what was being said, so I don't actually remember what I asked.
That's all right. I'll go through it. So it says, question for everyone later. In light of the financial disenfranchisement of women of colour and the fact that even when it is a job, it's contextually constantly low paid, how do you balance your life, access to joy, time to self, the responsibility of what is more of a spiritual callings than career choice. So, and when, how do you do you? That's the question. When do you do you?
I can start. So, PJ, thank you. So I love a bit of music, old school reggae, you know, dance, food, poetry. I see that you're a poet. And for me, that there are little ways. I don't feel like I feel like I'm constantly failing at the self-care thing. You know, when self-care really became a thing, I feel like I'm constantly letting the side down on that one. But I also feel hugely surrounded with love and care. I have a great partner. I have an amazing family, and I am held and looked after within the space. I've got really powerful sisterhood, and that care keeps me going. And I also really do sing and make a lot of noise. And you know, you put certain music on, and then that's me. And recently, I've become obsessed with the garden. So it's like, it's the things like I stand at the door and have a whole conversation with the robins for ages, you know, and because I actually think there is something for me also energetically and spiritually about reconnecting with the earth and reconnecting with nature. And I have spiritual practice that also really sustains and holds me. So I'm not religious, but I do have deep personal connection to spirit, and for me, my ancestors, my family, and so forth. So yeah, it's not one thing, it's different things.
I'm going to move on to different questions. So because we've got so many and we're running out of time, so I think if I kind of go for each question, and if one of you wants to then just answer it, that would be great. So the next question was, I think, from Gail, and it was about, I think, so Marai answered the question about messy truths. I'm not sure Sarbjit or Marianne did. So would either of you want to, or Dionne even, would you, either of any of you want to answer the question about messy truths?
Can you can we just remind ourselves? I mean, about, was it when we were talking about us? Can you just remind us about that question? Sorry.
I think it was when you were talking about it. So the thing that I remember, sorry, was that Marai brought up, you know, basically the past of racism and the messy truths of that, and to do the, you know, that people got paid. There was a lot of white women who got payouts from the abolition of slavery, and that there's a messy truth behind behind sort of women kind of coming together, but also being torn apart by issues.
Yeah. I think in a way we covered some of that. I mean, because most of the speakers have said that we really need to be kind of like having conversations. We need to be in the room, you know, I think as a BME sector on our own, as well as the wider women's sector as well. So I think that, you know, those conversations we need to be thinking about. And sometimes, you know, you do need a little bit of confidence as well to do that. And sometimes, you know, to challenge, you know, and sometimes, you know, anger can take over and things don't come out the way that you want them to come out. But I think the important thing is that we have those conversations, and if there is something that a sister or an organization has happened out there, then I think, you know, it's just to kind of talk that through really, without making sure, you know, being positive with it rather than make it become really destructive, and then we lose sight of what the issues are, and the issues are equality. It's about you know, addressing racism. So I would say conversations.
Thank you. So next question from RCD, I'm going to read them out. So what from RCD was a question for all: given the limited resources and the widespread need, how do you refocus on the most important things? How do you even decide what is the most important to focus on? So I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can start with that if you like. I mean, I think, as I said before, I don't think there's one most important thing. I think there's multiple things that we need to work on, and so that depends on, you know, as an individual, as an organisation, where do you think you can make the most difference? And that's about, you know, that's about both kind of urgency of the need that you're seeing, and where you are, but it's also about where your skills are, what you can most usefully contribute. And so, as I said, you know, for the women's budget group, the thing that we can do is the numbers. You know, I think we see one of our roles as providing numbers that the women's movement can use, not because the numbers by themselves solve anything, but because they're a tool that people can use for advocacy and campaigning and fundraising and so on. And that's the thing we can do. I don't think it's the most important thing that has to be done. I think it's the bit that we can do and we can do well. Other people have got other things that they can do and they can do well. I think kind of on an individual basis where people are thinking what's the most important thing, I think it's always best, you know, the thing that you feel most passionate about, the thing where you feel that you can make the most difference, is probably the space that you need to be in. You know, some people might see that as a kind of a calling or not, but, you know, I don't think we should be telling other women this is the issue that you should be working on. I think, as I said, there's so many different issues. There's space for us to all be working on so many different things.
I think for me there is something though about the distribution of resources and actually how we do that in the sector. So I think there are larger organizations that, for example, have great fundraising capacity that has been built up over time, but has sometimes been built up not just because of their technical ability and so forth, but because of who they are organizationally. And I think if those organizations would actually stop, for example, competing against small organizations, small marginalized organizations, or saying, how about this? I know that what is likely to happen is that this commissioner will resource me, but they won't touch you. What would it look like if, for example, we created a partnership, not where I control you, but where I actually pull the resource in so that you are able to do the work. And I'm not going to get on your case about how you do it. And I'm not going to do all of those things. Because I think for me, there is something around not so much about the most important, but recognizing that there are places where there is a certain acuteness of need that actually is not being dealt with sometimes in the broader sector. And when you have large organizations swallowing up those resources, it means that, as I said earlier, you know, organizations that are led by and for disabled women, so few. What does it mean if you're, you know, if you're living and existing and fighting back at the intersection of race, disability, class, for example? Who is there for you? Right? Who is there to make sure that you are supported? And so I think there is something for me about us thinking about that, the actual money, in terms of who's getting it, who's not getting it, and what that means in terms of women's ability to keep themselves safe and to access, you know, safety, justice, and ultimately some kind of move towards liberation. So I want us to also think about that. Like, what do we do as a sector around the money that comes into the work? Why is it always the big organizations?
Can I, Debbie, can I just say something on that? I mean, I just wanted to give an example of just following on from what Marai was saying. I mean, we know that women with no recourse to public funds has been an issue that Black women's organizations have been delivering for years and years. Mainly, it's all been underfunded, and people are now also trying to, you know, we're fighting towards trying to get some funding. And obviously the domestic violence bill, what happened there a couple of weeks ago, that was a big blow for the sector in terms of migrant women experiencing no recourse, was kind of given, you know, wasn't even recognized in the bill. So what I wanted to say was that, you know, this no recourse, and I have to say thank you to Imkaan for this, and the Asian Women's Resource Centre, along with 9 Black women's organisations, basically put in a bid to work with no recourse to public funds, but there were also lots of other organisations, larger generic organisations that went for this pot of money as well. But it was actually Imkaan that did that advocacy, did that work, and had those conversations with other organisations that were able then to get them to see, actually, yes, this is Black women's work, and you know, it should be led by Black women, and they should be at the forefront, because we've got the skills and expertise to do that. So I think that there needs to be that. You know, we don't always see that, so you need that second tier support to do that advocacy and be that voice for us to make sure that we do get some of the slice of the money.
That feeds in very nicely to the next question from Ellen, who says, I'm going to read out what she's written in the chat. My question: I work for a domestic abuse service, and I can see the great pressures that are put on frontline workers, and often the expectations can be so high and unrealistic that the women we serve suffer as a result. I have seen people point to competition between women's services for funding as part of the problem, because they set unrealistic targets to win the bid. Would you agree that this is a problem, and if so, how can women's organisations work together to ensure we are not divided by commissioners and our service users are not hurt as a result? Who wants to take that one first? Dionne.
How can we work together? I mean, I've seen quite a few bits on Twitter. I don't often respond, but I think people kind of agreeing that this is happening, the commissioning and you know, the difficulties of larger organisations, maybe not even valuing the work of smaller organisations. And I've been in space where I've actually heard the larger organisation put down the smaller small organisation, saying that their monitoring is not up to speed, or you know, how they work, or the pathways that they use are not it's not very good, and so it's not of quality. But where does quality lie? So I think, yes, we need to say about, yes, commissioning is bad, and how we're going to work better as larger organisations with small. But I think there's something about making a pledge, written something, I don't know, not just saying, yes, okay, we understand it. We understand that the smaller organisation needs to be treated fairly, and they've got specialist services. We don't want the lip service. What we want is actual action. And I don't know what that looks like, but some kind of pledge that says, I will not do X, I won't compete, I won't, you know, whatever that looks like. And if people sign it, then, you know, we can hold them to that. But of course, you know, there's no policing that. But I think I think us as a sector, we have to come up with what that looks like around commissioning, and why do we compete against each other. Maybe it goes back to that question of, have I got some racial biases going on within me, why I believe that I don't think that that organisation is worthy. So when you have the conversation, then you'll be able to set something around commissioning.
I think there's also something, isn't there, that the system itself is set up to force people to compete. You're absolutely right. You know, there is a real problem with large generic organisations coming in and getting contracts. But the system itself is not set up to provide the funding and support for specialist women's organisations. It's set up to force competition. You know, that's the whole point of the tendering process. It's a competitive process, which isn't the way in which you should be seeking to fund women's services, because, as you say, organisations are squeezed out, but also the process takes so long. It's time consuming. Organisations have to have people with expertise just in filling in bids, rather than, you know, the expertise in delivering the services. And it's often insecure and unreliable. And you end up in a situation where, you know, women's organisations don't know whether they're going to be funded, when they're going to be funded, how long for. I was speaking to, you know, women's organisations in Northern Ireland when the Northern Ireland Assembly was suspended, and all the funding came through the Northern Ireland Assembly, and while the Assembly was suspended, they weren't getting any money, and they were waiting to, you know, the start of a financial year with absolutely no knowledge of how much money they were going to get. How, you know, all the staff had to be on warnings of redundancy, because, you know, they could have got funded, they might not have got funded, and nobody knew, because the system was in complete paralysis. And I think that's a real problem. I've just seen Viv's comment that we don't have to compete, and I think she's right. I'm not saying that the people competing is a natural response to the system. I'm saying, you know, there are two things. There is the competitive behaviour, and then there is the way the system that is set up, which encourages that competitive behaviour. And actually, we need to do two things. One is about the way organisations behave to the other and to each other, and the other is about getting changes in the way that commissioning happens, so that doesn't continue.
Yeah. Can I want to just continue that thread, if I may. I think there is something. I agree. The system is set up, and it's set up in that way. It's capitalist, it's racist, it's ableist, it's all of them things. But we actually can resist the system much more effectively if we work together. If what then happens is larger organisation goes and sits around the table with the commissioner and actually has particular conversations, that will then have impact also, not just on whether they win the contract, but whether they settle for a contract price that also harms their workers, who actually are now in a situation where they are having to deal with larger caseloads, because actually you've just agreed a contract value of 100k when you know that really and truly, you know, that work costs 200k, and and yes, you're desperate to keep the contract alive, but you've got big reserves, right? So, you know, like, there's all of that happening. But also, rather than going to sit with the commissioner on your own, you could go, you know what, we're all coming. All come in, and I'm not showing up if all of my sisters can't be around the table. And we know collectively in this local authority that this work cannot be delivered for that. And if you're going to cut the contract, then what we're going to do is we're going to look at actually how do we distribute this work and what we're going to do collectively for this work. The fact that we respond to the system by always looking after just ourselves, right? And building up all reserves and making sure that we're all right at the expense of other organisations is not an appropriate response. Like, for me, it is not sisterly. For me, it's not my version of what revolutionary feminism looks like, right? And actually, one of the things that we can do is we can learn from old school village indigenous ways that involve, how can I eat when someone else can't? How can I go to sleep when you're going to sleep with your belly empty? It can't work. And that's what worries me, that we don't actually take it down to that very basic level.
But can I just say, Mary, doesn't it come back down to power then, sharing that power? Because a lot of people don't want to share that power. And also the power sharing is also about, you know, having meetings and then not cascading that information to Black women's organisations as well. So I think power dynamics within the sector, I think, also goes to, we have to look at that within, you know, when we're talking, when we're having our honest and transparent conversations, because actually in reality, people, larger organizations don't want to give up the power, and half of the battle is that, to get them to share.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question to keep it going so everybody gets
Can I just, sorry Debbie, can I just ask everyone, are we okay to continue? Because I know it said on our thing it was 12:15. I don't want to cut it short. We did say to Debbie that once we got talking, it wouldn't end at 12:15, but she thought everybody would be zoomed out. But we know the sector. So I just want to place that there. And as long as we're happy to continue, we shall.
You've still got plenty of people on Zoom, so they're not zoomed out, Dionne, so you're fine.
I'm good to carry on a while longer.
Yeah, so there's actually, at the moment, I think there's only another 2 questions. So if I just ask this next one, and if one person responds, then we go to the next one. Then that, maybe if we call it, end it after that, so everybody can go and have some lunch. So the next question is from Emma MacDon-O'God, I think. I hope that's how I say it. But anyway, she's asked, how can we empower younger women in deprived areas who are bombarded with the message that they should accept their lot in life? What can we do to empower them to see that there is a lot left to be done for ourselves and our sisters? How do we involve those women who have so much to offer the women's sector but no qualifications, academic background? So if one of you wants to respond to that.
I'll just do it really quickly. So, I mean, I think, again, this is for me about what does solidarity look like? Who is in conversations with those younger women? So many women that are working in our sector actually didn't come into this with formal qualifications, came into it with journeys of survivorhood, with actually coming in, you know, like volunteering, you know, kind of coming into support groups, coming into Women's Refuge, etc., etc. And so I would say, in terms of local conversations, who are the feminist sisters and how are they? Yes, and I know everybody's busy, but how are they in communication with those young women, and what are the messages? Because if the messages are really being delivered in such a way that excludes and say, to be a feminist, you have to do this. To be this, then you have to be this. Then actually that doesn't open space. I'm not here to empower anyone, but I'm here to support so that you may engage with your own empowerment. And so for me, it's much more about, if we open space, then we actually create pathways for women to come into. If we make sure that, if, you know, again, if we're eating, she's supposed to be able to eat. If we are in a situation where we're not dealing with the actual physical hunger, the need for shelter, etc., then it also makes it hard for us to then say, come and join in this activism and this feminist vision of a great world, when you're like, right now, what I need is I need a bed to sleep on. So I think it's also looking at what we need to do with women practically, as well as actually how we open space all the time. And sometimes for us older women, it means just moving out of the way and allowing and creating space for young women to just deliver on their leadership, and whatever their version of leadership look like that woman that Marianne spoke about in her short skirt and her cigarettes.
So the next question is from Sarifa. She says, hi everyone, how do we address the inequality of our disabled sisters face, as a lot of disabled women have children taken away due to institutional racism, disableism, and being women of colour? Which I don't know who wants to answer that one.
I think one of the really important things is to work in partnership with disabled women's organisations. So organisations like Sisters of Frida, which is a disabled women's collective, who've done, you know, a huge amount of work, for example, about the impact of coronavirus on disabled women, which hasn't had the attention it should, even though you know, disabled women are multiple times more likely to die of COVID-19 than non-disabled women. I mean, astronomically more. And I think it is back to those difficult conversations about who gets funding and who gets platforms, and when people have a platform, what issues they raise and whose experiences they think about. So yeah, I mean, it's not straightforward. I mean, I think really you need to include disabled women in conversations like these so that they can answer and talk about what they need from the rest of us in terms of support and solidarity.
Can I also just say, I think it's also important for our own organisations to be looking at, you know, how many disabled women are accessing our services. I agree that we should be working in partnerships with organisations like Hope and the organisation that you talked about, Marianne, but I think we also need to be looking at, you know, what we're doing to try and encourage accessibility for women. So I think for me, it's doing the both things, monitoring that and making sure that, you know, I'll say the word targets, but we're actually reviewing that on a weekly basis. If numbers are not coming through, and why aren't they coming through, we basically make sure that we're targeting and we're supporting, and also looking at our websites as well. A lot of our websites, you know, are sometimes they're not, you know, very they're not big typeset. There's lots of things that we can all do to encourage sort of women with disabilities to access services.
And can I also add, there's something about what the leadership in our organisations look like, who's on our management committees and on our boards of trustees, who's working in our organisations, the extent to which our working conditions actually mean that disabled women are excluded, but also outside of our sector. I mean, I love our sector, but we are obsessed with ourselves as well. There is also amazing activism happening by, you know, from women that aren't in our sector. So, you know, if I think about, you know, Kim and Jamoke at, you know, Triple Crippled, they, you know, two, you know, young Black disabled women who use the blog space and vlog space in, you know, creatively to actually lift up the voices of Black disabled women. And so I think it's structural, and it's also in terms of our own organisations, as Sarbjit said, as well as the issues that Marianne raised. And there's the stuff around solidarity, but there is also stuff where this is not, the world is not just our sector, you know, and who else is doing the work, and who else do we need to be, you know, connecting with.
I think that was it for actual questions. There's loads of comment on the chat. It's amazing. I've never seen chat go so it's great. I maybe just checking that any last things that have come through. If anybody has a last question, please put it through now. Quickly, I say. There's loads of ideas coming through on the chat. So I'm going to share the chat. If everybody's okay with me sharing the chat, if people could just say if they're not now, and I'll cut any comments they've said out. But otherwise, I will save the chat, and I'm going to share it with our speakers, because I think, you know, obviously when they're speaking, it's hard to read as well. So, and there's so many great comments and ideas and suggestions that I think it'd be really good for you guys to see it, because, you know, it's such a positive, like, loads of ideas. So yeah, we can share the slides too. I'll check with Dionne, but tomorrow I'll do an email out to everybody with some links to all the organisations, and I'll sort of basically put that all in an email. And we have recorded this, and I know there was a bit of a problem at the beginning, so I think my talking at the beginning is a bit cut off, but I think other than that, the recording's fine, and we'll put that up, and I'll send a link out to people when that's up as well. So Dionne, shall I hand back to you to do the last bit?
Oh, okay. I'd like to thank everybody for being on this Zoom call today, and very interactive. It would have been nice to have some live discussions as well as the stuff on the chat, but time wasn't with us. So I just want to thank Sarbjit, Marai and Marianne for taking the time out to have really powerful conversation today, and that we will continue this work. But I think, you know, what I took from today, I mean, there's just so much that, and I think the conversation, we've been trying to have a conversation and a real dialogue about what needs to happen in the sector, whether that be, what does it feel like for the one or two woman of African descent working in your organisation, which is white-led? How does power play out for her? What is it like every day if she brings an issue to her manager, and then she's kind of told that she's aggressive or whatever it might be? We need to have those kind of conversations about what that feels like. We also understand that we need to reflect on our own practice, but on our own selves, and that we need to do some self-searching and learning. We can't expect women of African descent or women from the African diaspora and women of colour to teach us what it's like from their point of view. They can only give you their experiences, but you need to understand what it is that's going on for you, and nobody knows that but you. I think we are necessary. and I'm going to take those 3 words that I've asked you to say. Necessary, we're inspiring as a sector, where it's heartbreaking, there's passion, there's strength and solidarity. And I will end on the solidarity bit, because I believe that we need to have a conversation of what does, and thanks to Marai for putting that out there, what does that solidarity look like in 2020 and beyond? But we need to do that, and we need to have those conversations and be prepared that they're going to be uncomfortable, and there might be things that will make us upset. But again, if we prepare ourselves to have the conversation, then we can be truthful and honest. And I thank you all for today.
Thanks, Dionne. Thanks so much for organising this as well. We've had loads of thanks coming through. Just to say, Vicky just said, I feel really inspired and energised. Thanks a lot for organising this space, and please let's meet to have difficult conversations as soon as possible. That's just one of like loads of things coming in right now. So just from LSE Library, thank you so much for organising this and getting everybody to take part. And for all those who've come in, those people who've attended this event, thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts and chat. It's been a really, it's not my sector, but it's been such an energising event for everybody concerned, and thank you.
Does anybody does anybody want to say anything at all, in like unmute something really bad that you want to say? Please say. It might not be a question, it might be a comment, but if there's anything that you feel that you want to say that you didn't get the chance, then please.
Hello. Sarbrina Jeffers. Sarbjit, I see you there.
Hi, Hasina.
There was a seminar yesterday afternoon from the United Nations. I missed it. But it was one of the seminars that we should, as women, we need to check up and look at it. I'll just post the link out and see who take it, because it's very good and it talk about everybody. So that's something that we as women need to go. Just go, go, go. Thank you.
Alcina, you're amazing, and it's nice to see a sister from Brent.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alcina.
Okay.
Anybody else want to say anything before we go at all?
Can I just express gratitude, please? I just want to say thank you to the warrior woman who, you know, on this panel. Debbie, thank you. Viv Hayes, yeah, I know that you're there. I know that I can't see you, but I know you're there, yeah? Dionne, listen, thank you. Thank you to everybody who came to be in this conversation with us right now. And just to say, yeah, blessings. Here's to the troublemakers. Here's to the angry ones. Here's to the ones that cry. Here's to our ancestors. Here's to our descendants. Here's to all of us, right? And to our collective liberation. So, blessings.
Oh, Dionne, can I just say a brilliant thank you to Wasi, who took those lovely pictures of us. You're amazing. And Helen, those blooming, all the kind of type scripts that you had to do with us rambling on. And, you know, thank you to everyone. I just wanted to mention them. Sorry. And Viv, of course, Viv. Oh my God, Viv.
Thank you, Sarbjit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone for any more? Vivian, do you want to say something? I know it's very hard for you not to say anything. Where are you? Vivian.
Hello.
There we go.
There she is.
I just want to say thank you really to everyone. Keep up the good work and let's take some of those things forward. We really need to move forward in a different way. I couldn't agree more with that. So I think we've got to do that. Thank you, women.
Okay, thanks everybody then. I'm going to just so you know, I'm just going to end the meeting so you'll all disappear. But I will save this transcript of the chat and I'm going to email it all to our speakers later on. Okay, so thanks guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.